Welcome to a very special episode of The Philosopher and the Monk. Today, we have one of the most fascinating people I've ever met, Professor Johnny Wink from OBU. How you doing, Johnny?
I'm doing fine, thank you, sir.
And there's RJ there.
Nice to meet you, Johnny.
Also known as Brother Shaw, right?
Yes.
Okay.
He's the philosopher.
And OBU stands for?
It's Ouachita Baptist University.
Baptist.
Yeah, and something interesting about that word, I had been in the state up in Fayetteville for 7 years before I got hired here. And I knew this place existed, but I knew nobody at the place, and I didn't even know how to pronounce it. The Ouachita, I thought would probably be pronounced Ouachita. And of course, I got disabused of that when I came down to interview for the job. And interestingly, there's a river out west, out in the far west, called the Ouachita, but it's spelled the way you would expect it to be spelled, Washita. Well, we have a river too, the Ouachita, but it's spelled Ouachita. And so, we're called Ouachita because there is this river that runs right through our town. In fact, it's well, you know where it is, James. It's
Yes.
Where I'm sitting right now. If I were to walk about 100 yards and go down a hill, I'd be at the Ouachita River.
Oh, wow.
And you, when I met you at Douglas Hofstadter's wedding, that night, we stayed in a 125-year-old mansion, the Scholars Inn. Remember that?
And wonderful.
And you had a shirt on. I'll never forget. It was the first night. So I'm in a new town, Bloomington, Indiana, with one of my heroes, Douglas Hofstadter, and your friend. And you had a shirt on that said beware of the warlock. And I didn't know who you were. So we're drinking and partying until 3 a.m. and talking with a whole group with the long-legged violinist Karen Bentley and Jay and Bonnie were on their anniversary, and we had such a great group there. And we go to bed, and I go to my door and I say, Johnny, what does that shirt mean? And you said, I'll tell you tomorrow, which I was a little, what does that mean? And so I go to shut my door. It's 3 a.m. And your door is right. I mean, you're 4 feet away.
Right.
And you go to shut your door. And as I'm shutting it, you say, oh, James. And I said, yes. And you said, I'll tell you what it means right now. I wasn't ready for that. And you said, I said, well, who's the warlock? And you said, I'm the warlock. And you slammed the door. And I put a chair against my door that night. I said, what the? And then the next day at the wedding breakfast, the groom's breakfast, you sat next to me and we talked about death and philosophy for about 4 hours straight, it felt like. Remember that?
I remember that. I remember so much having to do with that shirt because the long-legged violinist, I've actually, since that time, I've corresponded with her some, and we become friends, and I hear from her every once in a while. But one thing I remember is I think her first impression of me was probably not a really good one, and I did some things that that didn't help probably, because I know one time we were at breakfast, and I said something about not having seen a movie, and she said, you haven't seen, I had just said, I haven't seen X. So Karen did something reflexive that any of us might do, it's just a rhetorical flourish. She says, you haven't seen X? And I got up and went around the table and put my hand on her forehead. And, I don't even know this tall, long-legged guy. And she says, what are you doing? You fresh guy, But I got my hand on, I said, well, I was afraid you would come down with a fever. And Karen, she said, what are you talking about? And I said, you have, I think, an outbreak of you have itis. And that can give you a fever. And she said, what what is you have an itis? What are you saying? And I said, well, you get a case of you have an itis when somebody says to you, I've never read the Brothers Karamazov. And if you then immediately say, you haven't read the Brothers Karamazov, I've just told you that, and you said that, that's called you have an itis. And so I don't think she particularly appreciated that. But then when you and I were with her in that restaurant, and I'm still feeling like she's just thinking this is a country hick from Arkansas, but I'm wearing the Warlock shirt. And all of a sudden, a guy walks in, a black guy, who's a blues musician or a jazz musician, I think, and one of her heroes.
He was like cooler than can be.
He was like cool as could be, and he was absolutely, she was smitten with him. He was a hero. And he walks up to me and shakes my hand out of nowhere. He's just, and says, cool shirt. Is the Warlock shirt. So I think I got a little bit of street cred with Karen at that point, when her hero thought my shirt was a cool shirt,
That was a great
one. You might have been thinking, well, that Arkansas hick isn't all bad,
Now this hick from Arkansas teaches what at OBU, at Ouachita University?
Well, because it's a small school, Shaw and James both, and I'll call you Wizard. I let it be known to the podcast, I call James the Wizard. He calls me the Warlock, and Rick is Brother Shaw. And because, Rick, your last name is Arena, right?
Yes.
So I knew that was sand in Spanish, and I looked it up in a Chinese dictionary, and turns out that the word Sha in Mandarin means sand. That's how come I'll be calling you that. And James, of course, because he's, the Wizard. But at Ouachita, because it's a small school, I'm lucky. I get to teach a lot of different things. I don't have to specialize in something. So down through the years, I teach a course in mythology. I teach courses in grammar and linguistics. Those were my late wife Susan's specialties. And after she grew sick and then died, I took over these 3 classes in linguistics in general that she taught. And then lit classes, British lit, American lit. So I've gotten a chance to really play the field and been very grateful for that.
And I would say Latin also.
Yeah, and that's another piece of good luck of being at this place that I've made my career at. In the 1980s, I studied Latin with a guy who was teaching it here. Then he retired and we had no more Latin. And I kept studying it and bugging the school to let me teach at least first year Latin. And in the mid 90s, they did, and I've been teaching it ever since. And so I'm not a great Latinist, so I teach first year. And if anybody wants to go and take a second year, I offer that to them. Sometimes somebody will. Sometimes it'll just be 1 or 2 people. Yeah. So yeah, a rich variety of courses I get to teach.
That's so Hick from Arkansas.
Well, I'm a hick from Mississippi, strictly speaking. Transplanted to Arkansas.
So do you know RJ has a love of German idealism, the philosophical idealism?
Okay.
And he loved Schopenhauer. And would you know the word, like that great book Schopenhauer wrote, World as Will and Representation? Would you know the word in German for will? I don't know. Do you know that?
It'd be something like Vielen, but it's funny that talking about Shaw's passion for Schopenhauer. I've got a book on my shelf somewhere over here, and I go back, I don't know how often. I've read the book, but I've read the last paragraph a million times, it feels like. It's that wonderful, for me, it's the greatest single expression of pessimism that I know. I'm going to actually go over here to my shelf.
Okay, sure.
See if I can find that book. Yeah.
I think that's Johnny's office, I guess, at home.
Yeah, y'all keep talking.
He's getting this book?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, is that?
I'm guessing it's a pessimism. But Doug did think that book was the pessimist book.
Well, it's the Buddha seems like he's pessimist also.
Right.
Until you find out what his conclusion is,
right,
or his remedy for suffering is.
Right.
All of a sudden, it becomes very positive.
Yes.
Same thing with this guy. Maybe he's getting this book.
Yeah, it might be something like that. The essays. Johnny, we could wait.
You know, I
Yeah,
can't
studies
yeah,
in pessimism.
it's
Is it
so
Is it that
magnificent.
one right there? Studies in Pessimism?
No, it's it's like a compendium. It is from the world as will and idea. I mean,
Oh,
that's but I can kind of paraphrase what he says in this paragraph that I so love. He simply says that if we make a ledger and we start toting up everything that is good in life and everything that is bad, then any of us, he feels, should reasonably infer from making that inventory that life should never have been. And then he closes with this great image where he imagines this young man and young woman on a bench in a park. And they're looking at each other, and they're clearly going to go out the way Schopenhauer sees it and eventually procreate. And he says, and that's why they're looking at us so furtively, almost guiltily, because they realize that if they just wouldn't do that, and if everybody just stopped doing that,
right.
then we could bring this whole weary mess to an end. And it's really like Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata, where the guy on the train has the same idea that, you know, we just have to bring life down, and we can do it. You know, all we got to do is stop copulating. And
Didn't Mark? I know you're a big Mark Twain reader. Didn't he say something like, sometimes you just wish that the whole human race would hang themselves and get the farce over with?
You see, that's Schopenhauer's sentiments too. And yeah, you know, of course, Mark Twain always, I mean, part of what made him a great writer was he saw into everything that's wrong, you know, with things. But then as life went on and wore him down and he lost his children and his wife, he grew, you know, more and more deeply pessimistic.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Schopenhauer said, right, RJ, if two young men were friends and then they parted ways and met again in their 80s, maybe like 80 years later or 90, you know, whatever, when they got together, the conversation it wouldn't be a positive one.
Yeah, like he would say, like nature does not care for the individual.
Right.
You know, nature cares about the species.
Right.
That's why we procreate, you know, to keep that going. But it has no feelings for us individually.
Well, you know what Brother Shaw is saying there reminds me of something. You know that book called A Canticle for Leibowitz or Leibowitz?
Leibowitz, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know that book, James?
I know it. Yeah.
Well, you know, here's something fascinating to me. Jay and I have read that book aloud, and I've read it a couple of times, and it's a dystopian novel. So you get people, but clearly the thrust of it is, no matter how bad life is, and it's real bad, you know, in the world of that novel, no matter how bad it is, one of the main characters is a priest, and we must go on, you know, and it doesn't matter how hard how much we want out, we have to go on. So you read that book and you're fascinated and to me almost horrified, because so many people are in such bad shape in that book, you know, radiation from nuclear fallout and all this, that you're just wanting a merciful end. Well, I learned after the first time I read that book that eventually, I think the guy's name is Warren Miller, the guy who wrote the book, he eventually committed suicide. And a great irony, but what Brother Shaw said that so brought that to my mind is when he was asked why he had so changed, he had that same thing that Brother Shaw just brought up. Life felt impersonal to him. He didn't, you know, I know people in my neck of the woods, you know, Orthodox Christians of the Southern Baptist kind, talk about a relationship with a personal God. And for Warren Miller, there had just come some kind of point in his life at which everything seemed hopelessly impersonal. And so this guy who had written probably as pro-life a book as I ever read did eventually take his life.
Wow.
That reminds me of two things: Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors, the masterpiece he made, and in it he's making a movie, in the movie, of a philosopher, and the philosopher has the most optimistic life philosophy, the most optimistic, everything optimistic. And then Woody, this is going to be Woody's big film in the movie, in the character in the character in the movie's making. And he's a little guy who works for PBS and makes little short films. And this is going to be his masterpiece of this optimist. And he checks his messages, and the guy went out the window. It just says, I went out the window. That was his note.
That's it. That's the same thing,
That's
right?
it. Yeah.
You know, I of course owe you, Wizard, many things. Primary, the gift of your wonderful friendship, which is as fine a friendship as I've ever had. But I also owe you a lot of other lesser things, but great things. And one of the many ways in which I'm in your debt is I was already a big Woody Allen fan when you and I met, but you've kind of kept me with him and recommended books and all. And you were pushing the Zero Gravity, the book of stories. And I got that. And it's the next book, when it's my turn next, that Jay and I are going to read aloud. And I like all the stories in it, but there's one that I thought was about as fine a thing as ever I'd come across. And it's one called Utterly Mad.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, in which a cow, from the cow's point of view, is decided he's going to try to kill Woody Allen. He hadn't named by name Woody Allen, but everything in the description.
It's Woody, yeah.
Oh my gosh, James.
It's so funny. And the cow is funny.
Oh my gosh.
Hysterical. And also, to say on this topic, some of the greatest minds of all time, just about, I don't know how many, especially in the past, they all said the greatest thing is to not have been born at all. Mm-hmm. That's a big, I think Schopenhauer said it too.
Yeah, and Sophocles, one of the choruses in one of Sophocles' plays, says that very, very thing. Yeah, yeah.
Are you familiar with Jainism? James, you know it?
Yeah.
They absolutely say the best thing you could do is not have children, not procreate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's end the madness right here, right now.
Right there, absolutely, yeah.
That reminds me, just to add one thing to this topic, reminds me of Nietzsche in regards to suffering, where I'm just going to paraphrase it. I don't remember exactly. James, you can correct me.
I can start it. I'll let you do the ending. He said, to those who I care about, to those I really care about, I wish the most suffering, the most brutality. Is that the one you mean?
No.
Oh,
It was the one.
Let me finish.
Finish.
He says, to those I care about, he really sincerely means it. I wish that they have the most suffering, so brutal, horrible acts upon them. I wish them to go through such torment and betrayal and everything. And then at the very end of that, he says, because then they will have done what, I'm not sure the exact word, but the best that they can do, they will have endured. And to just do that. Okay, sorry. So what was your?
No, that's good. No, the one I was thinking of was a person could deal, and this is in regards to suffering. A person can deal with almost any how if they have the why.
Yes, my mother loved that.
Yeah, do you know the right way he said that?
Yeah, I have it. I have it. My mother wrote it in a bookmark and put it in a book.
That always clicked with me when for years, I've always thought about that. If you have a why to live, you can get through any how.
Right.
Right, Johnny? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't familiar with that, but that I think I was in some other form, maybe not Nietzsche, but that makes sense. Yeah.
So Johnny, where do you stand on all this? You're always having so much fun when I'm with you, playing with words, messing with everybody, lots of mischief, lots of fun. Where are you? What are your views? If you could, don't worry, no one's watching.
Yeah, as you certainly know, James, back in February of 2019, I lost my wife of almost 50 years, Susan. We had we had met. I'd been married previously for 3 years to a woman from Mississippi, Barbara. And then Susan and I met in graduate school, and we married, and we had a kind of a tumultuous, difficult time in the 70s, some difficulties in our marriage, but finally got them straightened out and sailed on into the 80s and had a good marriage, and then I lost her. And I, to this day, have a feeling, I mean, the world's strange for me. It feels gray. I mean, that's the primary color. A Susanless world feels to me like a gray world. But in the midst of that gray, there's all this color. I mean, there's you and Brother Shaw right now.
Right.
And I'm engaged with you, and I'm finding myself glad to be in a world that's got you two in it. Another thing, despite the graying and the sorrow and the grief that I feel I'm still in, for some reason I've managed to stay deeply engaged as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that would happen. I mean, Susan died, and I sort of stumbled through the spring semester of 2019 and didn't know what to do after that. And but I've kept stumbling, and I guess in a way, being engaged with students has been a help to me. So I'm really I'm kind of confused by just what's going on with me, because like I say, I want to say the first thing right off the bat is, yeah, it's a gray world, and yet it's so laced at the same time. And I found I can go on reading books, and I can go on being just infinitely delighted by something like Utterly Mad, and one of the things I like to do, my buddy Jack Butler, of whom you know, James, out in California, he's always educated me with numbers. I in fact, recently, inspired by Jack, I ordered Amazon Algebra for Dummies, because I wanted to go back to algebra, which I really liked when I was a young person. And I'm foggy, about terms now, and I wanted to remind myself what the order of operations is, and the commutative property of numbers, and the associative, and all of that. And I'm having a ball lying in bed. Jack and I also like to write anagrams. And in fact, let me take some notes here. Brother Shaw, can you give me your full name, first, last, and middle, as it appears on your birth certificate? Because I want to write some anagrams for you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's Richard Joseph Arena Jr. This will be nice.
RJ,
Yeah,
to bring up Shakespeare, RJ's Richard II.
Yeah, right.
And James, what is your full name? I mean, I know James Plath, but what's your middle name?
Vincent.
I knew that. I have known that in the past.
I think Johnny's ordering credit cards down there.
You want my social security number?
This is. I don't need any numbers, promise.
Wait, let me see if I can make this full
This
screen.
is my nighttime fun tonight. When I go to bed, I almost immediately go to trying to working with anagrams. So tonight, and I'll report back to you guys. Okay?
Oh, that's great.
Thank you. And Douglas Hofstadter, he would love that too, right, James?
Oh
He
yeah,
knows
I played around a lot with him with these. Oh, absolutely. I mean, part of my cutting. I mean, I've always liked to cut up with words and all, but Doug Hofstadter was a big inspiration for me. It's funny, Brother Shaw, in this very place I'm sitting, and I'm curious, let me just digress for a minute. James, you're in your apartment, right, in Long Island?
Yeah.
And where are you, Richard?
Same.
Do you live on Long Island too?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, he's just about 20 minutes away.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's good.
We both live where we were born, still roughly.
All right. Yeah, that's great.
I was in Brooklyn, but
yeah, roughly.
And Johnny, you're in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, which sounds like
Arkansas, right?
Sounds like Brigadoon or something.
Right. Doug Hofstadter has just forever been fascinated by by the name Arkadelphia, and has now been here 3 times. But this is the cool thing, and James knows this story, but Richard, I think you maybe don't. Um, Maybe James told it to you, but back in 2008, I was out walking on the campus, and I had just, it's funny, I had just been down to the river, that very river we started with, and I'd been down there walking around with a former student of mine who was showing her teenage kids Ouachita. And this all seemed so special to me because it was like in November of 2008. My mother had died like just a month before. And I had sent Beth, the woman I was walking with, a copy of a poem that I recited actually for James when we first met each other at the breakfast table one day. A poem by a former student of mine named Greg Brownderville called Mystery. And it's just a great, great, great poem. And I said it to James, one of the first things that we did in our bonding as friends, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
what you did was you pulled up a chair right in my face right before we were leaving Indiana, and everyone was a little sad after that amazing weekend. And you said, James, you were 3 inches from me, and you said, James, I'm gonna read this poem the way it's supposed to be. I'm gonna chant it to you, which I never heard before. And you got really close, and then you started reciting this poem, chanting it, reciting it, and at points just tears were coming down. It was such a beautiful poem about the mystery of everything.
Yeah, and you said it somewhere in the middle of the poem. You said, "You're killing me, man.
You're killing me."
Yeah. I love it. And you know, when we went out in the woods to the mystery bench, you know, I said it out there to the whole gang, you know. But the reason, what I wanted to say, the story that's so remarkable to me, and anytime I'm sitting here, I might think of this. Beth had fallen in love with the poem, so we took turns. I would recite the first line, she'd do the second one. We danced the poem down by the river, just taking turns. Then we come up, and I'm saying goodbye to her, and a student of mine comes up, a wonderful kid named Andrew Stevens. He was a music major, but he was in a creative writing class of mine. And he said, Dr. Wink, have you ever heard of Doug Hofstadter? And I hadn't at the time. And I said, well, I've heard of a Richard Hofstadter who wrote a book about anti-intellectualism. And no, he said, no, it's not him. He said, well, he's written a book called Le Tombeau de Marot, and you have to order it. And I said, well, thank you, Andrew, for the recommendation. I'll get on that. And he said, no. He wasn't going to just be fobbed off like that. He said, no, you got to come to your office. So he marches me back to my office right here. And I can still, it's so fascinating to me to think of how this happened. He comes over and he actually kind of pushes me into this chair. And I can still kind of feel the pressure of his arm on my shoulder. And he says, now type in Douglas Hofstadter, and so he just made me order it from Amazon right then and there. And okay, so I ordered it, and he just was not it wasn't gonna be one of these, maybe I'll get around to that later.
Right.
He was so convicted of the notion that I was gonna flip for this book that he made me order it, and it came a week later, and he was right. I flipped for it. And then I wrote Hofstadter a fan letter because of something. This was even before I'd gotten very far into the book. I knew I was going to like it, but he did something. It's the most clever put down of an intellectual or anybody else that I've ever. Do you remember what that is, James?
No, you're probably talking about Vladimir, right? Are you talking about him?
No.
No.
I had studied in New York. It's funny. I had two experiences.
I know.
In New York City, in Manhattan, and one of them was in 1977, and it was a bad experience. And then in 1980, I had a great experience. The great experience was I went to a seminar at New York University and studied with M.L. Rosenthal, who was one of the finest men I ever met, and we became friends, and he was adorable. But in 1977, I studied with an intellectual bully, a poet named John Hollander.
I remember that.
Yeah, and this guy was bad news. You know, he was he caused a couple of students to cry that summer, and not because he was chanting mystery. You know, these were just tears of humiliation. So he was bad news. So I get Hofstadter's book, and knowing that he's writing about rhythms in poetry, and that was one of Hollander's big things, I just absolutely go to the back of the book to the humongous
Index.
yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of the word index. I go to this humongous index, and I keep Doug's book up here. You know, this is like a Bible for me. So it's always on my, and I know where it is. I can't find the Schopenhauer, but I can find the Hofstadter. And so I go back to the back. It's a little bit, I mean, this is the most impressive index I've ever seen in my life.
Doug loves to have fun in the index.
And I find, you know, you won't be able to see this, but it says John Hollander, 44. So I go to page 44 and I read it, and the words John Hollander are not there. The word Hollander is not there. And I kept thinking, am I missing that? And I actually copied that page and had my students read it in a class just silently. And I said, did anyone see the word Hollander anywhere in this? And they didn't. But he tells a story of two pompous intellectuals that it was his displeasure to meet at a Shakespeare conference that he had been invited to at the Folger Library. And I write him and I say, I'm really loving your book, and I think you have performed the most subtle cut of anybody out. And so he very kindly wrote back. I mean, from the first time I wrote Doug Hofstadter, he was so available and so friendly, and he always has been that way ever since. And he then told me the story of, you know, his misadventures with John Hollander. But that's how it all began for me. It all began with a student forcing me to come into this office. And you know, without that, not only would I've never had the pleasure of him and his books, I wouldn't be talking to you, James. I mean, and all of the rest of that wonderful gang of Hofstadters, you know, I mean, just got great good luck. Yeah.
It's an amazing, and one quick tiny thing, I think you could tell why you're the warlock because of that same river. I think you were walking around the river.
Yeah, I wasn't on the river, but it does have to do with chanting, James. Back in 2001 of 9/11 fame, I took Hebrew. I like to study foreign languages. I've never gotten worth a darn at any of them, but I like to study them so I can learn how to say poems in them. That's the main thing I like to do. So I was taking Hebrew and finding it very difficult in the fall of 2001. And my dear mother-in-law, one of the great women I've ever known, Cody Wade, she got sick at the end of the semester, and she died. She actually died on the same day that her daughter Susan was to die years later, February the 7th. Yeah. And so I had to drop out of Hebrew after the first semester. The second semester came and went, and I wasn't in Hebrew. And that summer I thought, you know, I really want to get back to Hebrew a little bit. So I'm going to try to memorize the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew. I found it in a book of mine. And I was doing a lot of swimming that summer. So I would bring my swimming trunks up here. I'd walk over to the swimming pool with my trunks on and my towel around my neck. And I got in a period where I was learning, and I got to where I could recite pretty fluently the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew. So I'm going over there one day, and they're having a camp for kids on campus. And these two boys, junior high school boys, they pass me as I'm mumbling, and they're going faster than I am. Fortunately, they weren't going so fast that I didn't hear what one of them said to the other, and it stayed with me. And this was how this came about. The kid said, "Did you hear that old dude?" And the other kid said, "Yeah, it was like he was chanting a spell or something." because they knew it wasn't in English, you know. And so I started telling people that, and how they thought maybe they thought they'd wound up at Hogwarts, you know, instead of Ouachita Baptist University. And I said, and because one of the kids said he was chanting like a warlock, you know, and so that's what those kids, that Hebrew just came out warlocky to them. So I told Tom Offenberg, you know, the guy you never got to meet, James, because he died just before your first visit here. And he was a history professor, Brother Shaw, and a great friend of mine. And every Christmas, he would give me a shirt that was based on some little in-joke, something that had happened the previous year in our friendship. So one Christmas, after I told him that story that summer, I guess it was the next Christmas, I get the shirt that says, "Beware the Warlock." And that's how I became the Warlock, because those kids heard me trying to chant the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew.
Oh, I'm glad I heard that story. Now I know.
Yeah, now you know. Now you know why I am the Warlock. Yeah.
Johnny, would you be able to maybe recite or chant Mystery right now?
Yeah, I think I could.
Okay. That would be great.
Okay. This is a poem, Brother Shaw, that a guy named Greg Brownderville, who is a dear friend, and he's was a student of mine 20 years ago. And he now teaches creative writing at SMU down in Dallas. And so he wrote this poem back in 2007. I remember, because the first time I ever heard him read it was where he was being given an award at a thing. So yeah, so let me recite this for you. Mystery. My grandma painted pictures of her face on junkyard treasures, light bulbs, globes, ball bearings. My favorite was a frowning yellow vase with messy eyes like boot squash blueberries. 2 years after she died, we bought a house along a fault line. I remember fearing the vast black fields would crack as black as lightning, hell's glow exposed. The years have hidden that pale vase. I fear it may be lost forever. Lost the frowns like, I'm missing something here. I tell you what, instead of just goofing this up, because I might do that, let me just, I know this poem, and I've got it among my suites of poems I memorized. Let me just get it out and read it. So I don't want to butcher something as good as this, right?
Sure.
I remember that line, boot squash blueberries.
Boot squash blueberries, yeah.
Oh, that's a cool line, man. I remember that from like years ago. That line stood out. I can never forget that line.
This poem is in what I call Suite 108. This is a memorizing project I have. So Suite 108, in room 108A is Shakespeare's 108th sonnet. 108B has a poem that's in the English language, but not one of Shakespeare's sonnets. And that's where Mystery is. And 108C is a little Spanish poem. In fact, y'all will like this. I think it's a tiny little poem by Anonymous.
Sure.
And let me read it to you in Spanish, and then I've got a good translation of it here. And it's just a great little poem about falling in love and all that entails. So it was written by Anonymous somewhere in the 16th century. Por el mar de mis ojos pasando a nado, encontré la sirena de mis cuidados. Swimming across the sea of my eyes, I found the siren of all my sighs. So there she comes, that girl, that siren, and there she comes, and he's going to sigh forever now. But back to Mystery. My grandma painted pictures of her face on junkyard treasures, light bulbs, globes, ball bearings. My favorite was a frowning yellow vase with messy eyes like boot squash blueberries. 2 years after she died, we bought a house along a fault line. I remember fearing the vast black fields would crack as bright as lightning, hell's glow exposed. Though far from marvelous, our first trimmer caused Grandma's vase to dance off my dresser and break across the floor. I stayed up half the night, my smooth, small hands roughened with glue, puzzling shards back together. The years have hidden that pale vase. I fear it may be lost for good, lost the crevices like fault lines on the face, mapping her spirit. By now, I can't be sure. Did she paint those, or were they cracks I mended carefully? There is no one to ask. No one knows. Everything that shatters is a mystery. Sam Doyle, an artist of the Gullah Islands, painted in the colors of coastal moons and with a virtuosic violence, high art in voodoo vision, blues cartoons. I motored into Sam Doyle country once and found a gallery of those wild works he used to trade for whiskey. A docent told me Doyle believed the haints he often painted fled their sweetgrass jungle when a car first disturbed the island night. Most of his work would leave the coast as well. Picking strawberry guava, a man outside the gallery says he remembered Doyle. He called him Uncle Sam, and I thought, yes, the one we never knew. Breathing the smell of a salt wind rattling the wild palmettos, I wondered where a car-shy haint might flee, now that birds nest in Walmarts, R's and A's. Everything that scatters is a mystery. A scientist says to me, I thrive on knowing. For 20 years, he's researched one scant slice of brain. I get it. Granddaddy's been hoeing one garden plot for even longer. It's nice to know a passage of the world by heart. From Om to Amen, from Om to Amen, sacred books agree the world is words. One myth says destiny is cosmic mail, epistolary art. Science then is grammar, and power to it, that noble, necessary enterprise. Praise be for ophthalmology, and yet it can't tell all that's in a lover's eyes. The world poem, if parsed, will not reveal its meanings, one and all, and settle matters. What we know, we never know in full. For all around our best interpreters, faces are dancing, spirits flying free. Everything that shatters, everything that scatters, everything that matters is a mystery.
Wow.
That's what I killed James Plath with back in 2012 at the Scholars Inn.
You just killed me again.
You must be like Shakespeare, your cat. You must have 9 lives, sir.
That's funny.
So, RJ, did you want to talk a little philosophy? That's a perfect opening right there.
Isn't it? Yeah, I was just about to say, this is a good,
Well, actually,
good
yeah,
place to go.
I was just thinking before, when your wife passed away, you like all your colleagues and friends are also teaching at the Baptist University.
Right.
Were people telling you like faith in God is important to have?
Sure, to be sure, Brother Shaw, for sure. And here's a strange thing about trying to deal with my grief. A number of well-meaning people would give me what I think of as sort of 12-step approach books to grief. The grief process, which is one of my least favorite phrases in the world, the grief process. I had this kind of, I know if there's well-meaning and people who write these books are certainly well-intentioned, but I thought this is my own darn grief, and, I'm going to have my own process. I don't know where it's taken me, but anyway, weirdly, I found that I really couldn't read those books. They just depressed me even to try to read them. But strangely, there are 2 books about grief, and because they're not formulaic books about the grief process, but about 2 people who grieved enormously when they lost loved ones. I had read one of them before, Susan died. I'd read it numerous times. I'm very, very much an admirer of it. The other one, I'd heard of the book, but I'd never read it. So I went back to the one I'd read before, and reread it, and it was painful to do, but it was great too. And I read it with a kind of zeal, whereas the formulaic grief books, I can't even open them hardly, you know. And then the other book I never read, but I always liked the title. I read it. The books are the one I'd read before, but which mattered more to me than ever when I read it after Susan's death, is A Grief Observed, and this is by C.S. Lewis.
Great book.
And then the other book is Joan Didion's The Book of Magical Thinking, and it's also a tremendous book about her own. I mean, she had a daughter who was desperately ill in a hospital in New York, and she and her husband were going over there and attending on the daughter. And one night they came back to their apartment in New York, and he died of a heart attack at their dinner table. And so then she had the very ill daughter, who did happily recover eventually, and the husband that she'd been married to forever and loved deeply. And her book is so great. You know, she calls it the year of magical thinking because she fell into the habit of doing magical thinking, and she didn't think that was something that could ever happen to her, but she did. She would, you know, the way it worked for her was it would be like, you know, she'd think, okay, you know, if I see 7 red lights in a row, he'll come back, that kind of thing, you know. And so, yeah, so that to me was kind of an irony, Shaz, was that here books about grief per se, that are written to help with this. Lewis didn't write, he wrote his book because he was grieving. He lost his wife. And that's why Joan Didion wrote hers. And if they help somebody, fine, but they may or may not. You know, interestingly, Lewis wrote his book under a pen name. Mm. And one reason he did was Lewis, as a pious Orthodox Christian, he realized that what he was saying, so far as his grieving, he realized that this was going to stick in the craws of some Orthodox Christians. Because one of the points Lewis makes in this book is that being a believer, as he was for different Christians have different views of this, to be sure. But for Lewis, this in no way promised that he would be reunited with Joy Davidman, you know, in body or spirit in some eternity. That was not for him Christianity. Now, I have a lot of friends, good, dear Christian friends, and that is part of the consolation, you know, of their faith, is that reunion. But not every Christian feels that way, and Lewis absolutely didn't feel that way.
Didn't Lewis write Real Christianity or True Christianity also? I think another book.
Somebody calls mere Christianity, with the idea of the mirror being Christianity sort of boiled down to its basics. I want to show y'all one little thing Lewis says, and I think I can lay hands on A Grief Observed. So I'll be right back, sure, guys.
I love Lewis. Remember that quote, RJ, about if you're going to read the scripture, the true Christian scripture, don't take it literal like the way I did as a 12-year-old, or most kids indoctrinated in a religion where you think angels are flying around and, you know, all that. And then at some point it's absurd to believe in that kind of stuff. But Lewis said, don't take the angels the angels are more about the feeling of lightness, like Chesterton would say, or the gold in the Bible represents something eternal. It's all symbolic. Mm. But the way they taught it, you know, it seemed literal. I don't know if it was me or the church, or both.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I'm gonna y'all keep talking. I'm gonna sit in silence here for a minute and look. Find the passage.
Okay.
So y'all keep talking. Okay.
I have something to say, and maybe you'll hear me while you're looking.
Yeah, I will. I'm listening and looking. I'm multitasking now.
Right.
Wizard. Okay.
So RJ and I were both, and we still are, very skeptical of all sorts of claims, but we were real skeptic, atheist, materialist skeptics, and we didn't believe in anything. And from the mystical experience that I had, and many times since, I would say that that feeling of meeting your loved one at some point, even if it's just like you said, souls somehow, there is a what when you experience the ego dissolution, there is a maybe a little brief moment where you realize who and what everybody is. You realize who everybody is, who your mother, your father, your friends, your lovers, your enemies. You realize that they're all made of this one thing,
Yeah.
and or no thing, which is just spirit. And so there is a brief reunion in that you're on this same groundless ground of just a pure consciousness. And so you do see them again, but you see them as they really are. And there's only this one immortal consciousness pretending to be separate people, separate lives, separate, almost like a hallucination, like in a dream at night where you could dream up five lions about to eat you, or five people that are chasing you with guns or knives, and they're all made of you.
Right.
So for that little bit, it's like Dorothy waking up in bed and saying, you were there, and you were there. It all becomes one, and the one is the one eternal, immortal consciousness. So I think that's what Christians are trying to point at.
Right.
But then it becomes this fantasy of pearly gates and heaven up in the sky, and you'll be there in body, and it would be you and Susan, but there'd be no more end.
Well, I didn't find the passage. I'll send it to you later, James, and you can pass it along. But something I hope you guys will do sometime, and I can help you set this up, because I know I've Zoomed with him once, but I would love for y'all to have on your program my actor friend Joe Graves.
Oh, yeah, I would love that.
Yeah, because Joe, I think you three are really kindred spirits in this thing of mysticism. And James, when I met you, I know your mother was dying when I first met you in 2012. You, at that point, you were atheistic, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And
I had the experience. What's funny is that I had a tremendous experience in 2009, and RJ had a tremendous epiphany. Would you say 2010, RJ, 11? Where me to experience him through this amazing epiphany that we knew that we were wrong about everything. I mean, we had it all inside out, upside, like a sock. When you put your hand in, you pull it. Yeah. Everything was wrong. But then still, when I met you, it wasn't a baseline experience yet. So it was so tremendous, but it was still something back in 2009, and it did change everything, but I was still sort of in the cocoon,
Yeah.
And so I could talk Woody Allen and atheism and Darwin and death, and there's not, but I think then I still had some kind of change where it had softened me to see that maybe there is something, not a personal God, but some kind of source, or some kind of, it was still like a Spinoza,
That's exactly right. That's the epiphany I had. It simply was the realization that there must be an absolute permanent reality underneath everything changing. There has to be.
And it's not personal.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
That's all it was. It was so simple, but it was so true,
Right.
So then when I came to see you in 2013, and my mother had just died.
Yeah.
RJ and I had ramped up the meditation, ramped up some psychedelics, ramped up, we call it astonishment medicine. Like we ramped it up, and we really were we were bringing it into our everyday, or at least weekly, and then a daily lives, where we were dissolving the ego nightly, sometimes in the morning, whenever, just working on it. And then I came to see you, and I think you saw, I remember we were upstairs in a restaurant, one of your favorite places, And I said, Johnny, you ever have a mystical experience? And we started talking about that, and I couldn't shut up about it.
Well, you know, after Susan died in the summer of 2019, my friend Joe Graves came to town, and I went down into Texas with him. He wanted to visit some old friends down there in a couple of places in Texas, and that's when he told me about, you know, his own explorations, and he's told me a lot of stories, and one of my favorites, and then I wanted to mention something he said in a Chinese restaurant here in town that was so striking to me, and I can't get out of my mind. But I'll set this up by telling you about a story he told me recently. Joe spent most of his life, or a good bit of it since 2000, in China. He's made a lot of money there. He's actually become a millionaire in China, producing, directing, and acting in various plays and musicals and the like. And some years ago, he had a very frightening experience. He was actually over in Taiwan, and he was trying to light a cigarette, and the cigarette fell out of his mouth. And he looked in his face, in the mirror, and his face was just, something was wrong. He thought he'd had a stroke. It turns out what he was afflicted with was something that y'all have probably heard of called Bell's palsy. And thanks to Bell's palsy, what it does is it can be a temporary condition. And he's gotten back almost everything that he had before, but it was just frightening. I mean, he went to a doctor there in Taiwan, and he was diagnosed and so there was a process of recuperation where, you know, he just was having a rough time. So he's back in Beijing, and one night, it was the winter, and it was cold as it could be. He had an apartment up on the 6th floor, and somehow a book that he was reading fell off the balcony, and I don't know why he was out on the balcony in that cold weather, but so he went down to get the book, and he locked himself out. So now he's found his book, but he can't get back in, and nobody wants to let him back in. There's a woman at one window, but finally he does get back in. He doesn't freeze to death, but he said that was kind of a low point in my life. I had Bell's palsy, and I still wasn't recovered from that. I really thought I might freeze to death in a street in Beijing, and he just felt he was up against it, you know. And so, but then somebody did let him back in, and he went back upstairs, and this is way before Susan died. He goes back upstairs, and he starts reading the book again. It was the Upanishads. And he said that was like the beginning for him. And what he did in the Chinese restaurant after Susan died, that still just startles me. You got to keep in mind that I don't have a better friend in the world than Joe Graves. He was my student in the 70s, and we've stayed in touch all these years and have spent a lot of time in each other's company. And there's no one in the world who loves me more than Joe Graves does. We're sitting there at the restaurant, and he said, Johnny, the fact is that Susan is as present with you and me at this restaurant right now as if she were sitting right there by your side. And what I remember thinking about that then and later, you know, if Joe hadn't meant that with every fiber of his being, that would have been as cruel a thing as anybody could say to another person, you know. And since I knew that Joe Graves loves me and is not wanting to be cruel to me, I knew that whatever I might believe, that was something that Joe Graves believed as surely as he believed that he has a right hand and 5 fingers on it. And that's just stayed with me. I've never thought Joe was being cruel. It just came up. It just came up. That would have been cruel if Joe hadn't believed it, as certainly as he believes he's got a right hand. You know?
And I think the same would go for. We've emailed a lot, you and I, and I've emailed Joe, and he reminds me a lot of you. But sometimes you'll be a little dark in the email, a little gloomy, and I will light it up the other way so much that you could take it wrongly. And I say, oh man, I hope, but you always write back with a wonderful comment, you know.
I never do, you know. I love the way friends can be friends with each other. I remember that after my first wife left me and ran off to Oregon with the guy she left me for, she was writing me a letter, and she kept having kind of second thoughts about this, but she was basically writing me one day, and it was a nice letter, and she said something like, "My love is your," and she ran off with a guy named Joe Neal. That's important for this story. So she closed her letter with, "My love is yours forever." And I decided to throw myself a pity party at that point, you know. So I went over to where Jack Butler, my heart friend in California, and Lenise, his wife at the time, were living. And I plopped that letter down in front of him and I said, "Look at this, Jack. What do you make of this? This close. My love is yours forever." And, you know, Jack's my friend. So he's got, what's he going to do? Is he just going to join the pity party, you know? And he decides he'll take a little bit of a chance. And he'll try to pierce the little bubble of my self-pity with humor. So he looks at that, you know, "My love is yours forever, Barbara," and he says, "Johnny, I guess that means you can have Joe Neal whenever you want him." And I hear it that way, "My love is yours forever." And, you know, instead of walking out in a huff, I just started laughing. The self-pity was gone, and Jack and I had a good time, you know. But the way that friends try to be friends, and the best way they can. You do to me, Joe did to me, Jack did to me in that case, with just that wonderful anesthetic of humor, you know.
RJ, any philosophy you want to get into? A little Schopenhauer?
Yeah, I was gonna mention something about when somebody speaks that way. If you can't see that they fully mean it, like 100%, then it seems like like an empty positivism.
Right.
Yeah, and it's meaningless.
Right.
It's just like wishing things to be better.
Right.
But if you really mean it, and I look in your eyes, and I'm intense, and I'm saying, "He's here right now," that's different. Yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah.
Totally. Oh yeah. Well, if you want to talk about like philosophy, one question me and James talk about all the time is the universe that we live in was pre-planned or blind? And that's a fascinating question because James, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, you know, I see
I want after you go, I want to know what Johnny thinks.
Okay.
From this experience of ego dissolution, where you become so still that the thinking calms down to it's like a ripple stopped rippling, and the ripple has 8 rings, then 6 rings, then 4 rings, then 2 rings, and it's dying to be a ripple.
And the ripple, by the way, is the self that we're used to. The self that completely are. Okay.
And it's just vibrating on the water, and it always is water, but it's identified, let's pretend, as a ripple, like we identify as a individual and a person, separate, you know, and persona comes from persona, right, Johnny?
Right.
Which means mask. So it's like the man. So now the ripple can't help but pop into once it stops vibrating, there's if we can imagine the ripple experiencing, it would experience a death. Then the death is the death to being identified as a ripple, which is a misidentification because it's just temporary, just like a person. But now, boom, the ripple is no longer a ripple, but the most amazing thing happens beyond any words, that the ripple is now the full lake, the perfect lake, or the ocean of consciousness, or the pure imagination beyond faces, bodies, brains, heads, legs, the world. There's this perfect imagination that just gets lost temporarily in its own imagining, which is Johnny Wink, RJ, James, and you get caught in the person. And the game, I'll say game, is to, I think like St. Augustine said, God became man in order for man to become God again. or human to become God again. So you get lost, you leave the garden, you fall into a world of duality, and then you suffer like hell, which is good, like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer say, because that's the alarm clock in the dream of separation that's separating you from your eternal true nature. And boom, if you don't push the suffering away and you go into the suffering, like you didn't want to push it away with all those grief books and self-help book, you wanted to let it ride and see where it took you. And as you do that, you realize that you are everything disguised as a limited person or with lack and finite, and there's a dream of birth and death, and this is eternal.
All right, so we before Johnny goes, so you and I agree that the ripple, when it realizes it never was a ripple, it always was the lake.
Right.
And it always was the lake, it just in motion.
Right.
That's a ripple is the lake in motion.
Vibrating.
So the lake. Yeah. So that realization comes, but the question, so we both agree on that, is why is the rippling? Now, what I'm saying is, here's what I'm saying. Let's call the lake universal consciousness. Universal consciousness is having internal experiential states. It's like self-folding and reflecting on itself. It's like it's looking for self-recognition.
Right.
And in that way, ripples are caused because it needs the ripples
to see itself,
experience itself.
Right.
So it's a very tricky question because it's like, are ripples?
Are you trying to trick Johnny Wink?
No.
That's easy enough.
You can't trick the warlock.
But it's tricky in like, if it's a plan, if it's a play, if it's a plan, if it's planned, if it's pre-planned, I don't say it could. I say it cannot be because there's too much innocent suffering.
Right. I understand.
It's not like a great plan. If it's Schopenhauer calls it blind, it's not a plan. He says it's blind, which means it's not deliberating. It's not self-reflective.
It's just caught. It's caught like in its
not
own.
Conceptual. Yeah, no concepts.
Can we say it's hallucinating?
Well, if hallucination involves conceptual thinking, then no, it can't hallucinate.
Meaning the court is like a hallucination that it's a person.
Right. So if you hallucinate, what's being hallucinated? What is doing the hallucination? The like higher order functions of the brain, like the self-reflective brain, the metacognition brain, or the base level of phenomenal consciousness, which is like what it's like to be. Is that causing hallucination, or is it the conceptual thinking? So it's probably the conceptual thinking causing the hallucination. And if it is,
it's forgetting who it is, what it is.
Right. So if it is, in Schopenhauer's view, the will or universal consciousness is not deliberate or it's not conceptual, so it can't be hallucinating. Right. I know that goes against your point. However,
no, my point would be that from the point of view of the pure consciousness or the immortal consciousness, from the conceptual thinking is insanity. Like that would be insanity from this point.
And conceptual thinking for Schopenhauer would be the only way in which universal consciousness can know itself.
I know.
So there's your tricky part right there.
It's very tricky.
So it needs, suffering, what is suffering for Schopenhauer is, sorry, Johnny, we're going to get you involved in 1 second.
All right. I'm enjoying this. Keep talking.
So it's blind. So it's not, it doesn't know they're suffering, right? But that doesn't mean that there's no telos. That doesn't mean that the universal consciousness doesn't have a goal. It doesn't mean that.
Right.
Because we always associate a goal with a plan.
Right.
You plan, and then you execute the plan and get your goal. But this kind of goal, you can have a goal without knowing you have a goal.
It's like a goalless goal.
Yeah, that's what Schopenhauer was saying. So the suffering in that way, the suffering we all experience, some a lot worse than others, is not intentional.
Right.
There's no man in the sky saying, I want you to suffer
No.
and I want you not. So that's not happening. Okay.
Right.
The goal is for self-recognition, but that goal for self-recognition, there's the suffering. I mean, millions of years of evolution and blood, sweat, and tears just to get to the point where we not just have an experience, but now we know that we're having the experience.
Right.
And that's the deliberate, that's the conceptual part. Like we evolved this conceptual mind, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely like are right real close to each other. But
you want to see what Johnny thinks?
Yeah, so I say no plan, it's blind. James is leaning towards like it's more like a play or
yeah, but only from the awake when you awaken as this, then you see that it was a play. But during it, when you're in a cage on fire and someone's poking you, it's not. It won't feel like a play at that moment.
Right.
But it is just like a dream when a tiger's eating your leg.
Right.
And the best way to know it's a dream is to wake up. So suffering is your guy Schopenhauer would say suffering is the best way to wake up from a dream.
Well, I mean, suffering to him would be the reason why to deny the will.
Yeah, and that's the best way to wake up.
You suffer a lot, you better, the will. Well, see, and the whole key with him is the nature of the will or universal consciousness. And Johnny, you're coming up right now after this. He says that, and here's the key. Here is the key. The nature of ultimate reality is, he calls it will, specifically on purpose to let people know it's volitional. It's not made of atoms.
Right,
it's
right.
Made of feeling.
Pure,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he calls it, and I have right here, he calls it urge, keen desire, impulse, instinct, and intuition. And the universe, he would say, is created in the same similar fashion, like a flower turning towards the sun. Very similar. Like it turns not because it knows it's better to face the sun, but it feels better to turn towards the sun. So universal consciousness is feeling its way, not planning it,
right?
But feeling. Yep. Oh, this area is no good. There's no harmony.
Right.
Let's stop that operation. Not with the mind.
Yeah. Right.
And let's go towards this feeling.
So when I say play, I mean, I don't mean this. I mean love play, which is the same as feeling.
Yeah, that's why it's why it's
a universal love of just wholeness, finding wholeness, like water rolling down a hill finds a hole. It'll fill the hole. It just finds, like needles to magnets. It just keeps finding.
Yeah, if you want to, like a good way to look at it, because you're speaking from eternity, and I'm mostly speaking from the human point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Buddhism and Hinduism. Like you're the Hindu, and I'm the Buddhist, and like you're saying, all that's real is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. Everything, and I'm saying no. Everything is emptiness, because from my point of view, it's empty.
Right.
But from your point of view, it's you call. So there's the distinction. But Johnny, we've talked too long. I'm sorry. Is it planned? Is the universe? Is there a man in outside?
No man.
Is there a being? Is there? I call it pure subjectivity. But is there something planning this or no? That's the question for you.
Well, I'm gonna go the long way around here, because the various things that y'all have said caused me to start jotting down little notes. Some of them are questions for you. Some of you reminded me of some things other people said. So bear with me as I'm not trying to be evasive about this. I'll tell you what what I think in time's fullness. But I do want to ask y'all some questions and kind of set this up. James, you may have talked with Richard about this or not, but I wanted to tell you a little bit why James and I will sometimes talk about mystics and biscuits. when my son was 3 years old and we were living in an apartment, our first year here in Arkadelphia, Susan was cooking some biscuits, 2 of them, I think, and Jean walked in to report to us what was going on in the kitchen, that there were these biscuits being made. But it came out, Jean said, yeah, there are 2 mystics in the kitchen. You know, he just flubbed that. And so that's been a joke in our family, you know,
I like
since then.
that's funny.
So when after Susan died, I started keeping company with a woman who was a student of mine, and we're not really boyfriend and girlfriend, but we go on picnics together and we have a nice time. Her name is Beth. She's not the Beth that I recited Mystery with. Her name is Beth Polo, and because she hangs around me, she's gotten a bunch of nicknames because I like to nickname people, and she's the Spider Goddess and various other names. Well, Beth, and I've decided I've had this holy trinity of mystics in my life. You know, James, Joe, of whom I've spoken earlier, and Beth is herself a mystic.
Oh,
We then decided we would call people who are not of a mystical bent, and this would come closer to being materialists. We would call them biscuits. So we got biscuits and mystics.
that's
And
so.
I've decided I'm going to turn my trinity into a quaternity now. So my 4 favorite mystics are James, Joe, Beth, and you, Richard, you know, because
Oh, I'm a mystic.
you're obviously a very engaging person. So that's my holy quaternity instead of my holy trinity.
Quaternity, I like that.
So then here's a second thing that I wanted to, that came up in my mind. So Beth and I, you know, Beth being absolutely a mystic, and that's why I would love, once again, I'd love her to get in with y'all on one of these podcasts too.
Definitely.
And she's just a wonderful, wonderful person. And so she has this big, pretty blanket that when we go on picnics together, we lie down on the blanket, you know, and drink a bottle of wine and eat a picnic, and her dog scouts along. And if I can ever get you guys to Arkansas, I want to show you a beautiful, I'll send James the pictures of it. I don't think I've sent him a beautiful picture of a ruined bridge that's about 10 or 15 miles from Arkadelphia. It's just an old abandoned bridge. And Beth and I found out that you could walk on it. And so we had a picnic once on it, on the blanket. And you know, we've come to call it the Socratic blanket. And it's the Socratic blanket because it will comfortably seat both a mystic and a biscuit in a certain way. So here's the deal. When Socrates in his Apology asserts that no harm in eternity can come to a person, to a good person, he offers 2 possibilities. And Susan, Beth and I think of these now as there's the biscuit and the mystic. In the biscuit possibility, he says, imagine the best night's sleep you've ever had, and a sleep that was dreamless, and it was so relaxing and so blessed that when you awoke, you were utterly relaxed. No muscles ached. And you almost wish you could go back into that. But nothing was happening in it. It was not a dream-filled sleep with pleasant dreams. It was a deep, dreamless sleep. So Socrates offers that, and it reminds me of a very obscure ancient Roman or late Roman goddess called Oblivio, from which we get the word oblivion. And if you go into the arms of Oblivio, when you die, when your earthly body dies, you sleep the Socratic deep dreamless sleep. It's all over. That's it. Socrates then, as y'all both know, also said, but then there's another possibility. Maybe you pass on into another order of existence, and there you get to talk with the great dead that you've admired. And then he puts in a little sting, you know, at the people who are persecuting him. He says, and there you'll not be punished for telling the truth. You can have the great conversations like the ones we're having, where the 3 of us can be utterly honest with each other and say what's on our minds. So for Beth and me, the Socratic blanket. Now, to get to where I am and was and have been and maybe will be again, I was a mystic. Maybe not quite in the sense that you guys are, but let me define my terms here, okay? We're supposed to when we talk philosophy. For me, in the broadest sense of a word, the mystic is the one who feels that something of us is going on. In some way, we're going on. This old 77-year-old body of mine, I don't know how much longer it will be constituted the way it is. But something of me is going on. Certainly Beth believes that. She's, she's not an Orthodox Christian, but she certainly believes that. I suppose you all both in some way believe that, right? That there's something in you that is eternal, right? Am I right?
Not only believe it, know it. And I think what a great definition, Evelyn Underhill she wrote the book Mysticism, a very great, I'm going to come there to that office and make you order it. Big book.
Joe Graves also swears by that book.
Oh, yeah. And her definition would be a mystic abides in that reality, not just believes in it, but spends their time in that state, in the union, in the unicity of the consciousness.
Right.
Yeah, I would say mysticism would be the realization that individuality is an illusion, and that
but you have to stay in it, and stay in it is the
what goes on, or what continues, like what you're saying. Would you say you said goes on, right?
Right.
Is the one and only pure consciousness, the ultimate reality, or the lake, the lake analogy.
Right.
That's what's going on. Right. So you're a ripple, but really you're the lake, and that's what's going to continue forever. Right. So you will never die.
I'm not swimming. The Buddhist idea of I'm not swimming in the sea, I am the sea.
Right.
Yeah, yes. I am the sea in which I'm swimming. Yes.
And so it's just a case of mistaken identity where we identify with the finite person, because we're told a story that we were born in this hospital and blah blah blah, and on and on and on, and we learned the song row 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 your boat when you're 5, and then by 15 and 20 you have bills and things to pay, and you're in school or job, and you totally forget, and you get so lost in this monkey mind person that you forget that essential nature that's always there.
That's something Wordsworth writes beautifully about in a lot of his poems. He says, shades of the prison house begin to close. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending. We lay waste our powers, right?
Yes.
Then let me keep asking y'all some questions and saying some things here that I've got jotted down.
Can I just say one quick thing about your Socrates blanket? I'm sure RJ has things to say about it, but Woody Allen would answer that sleep, that beautiful sleep. I'm pretty sure if sleep is like death, and in the morning when you wake up, he said it's pretty hard to find the light switch in your slippers. So he's a biscuit, a big biscuit.
But we agree with you, Johnny. We both agree with you and Beth that there is something in you that is going to go on. Yes.
Yeah, but see now, I was once a mystic, and I think I was a mystic, like I say, in the broad sense. Something's going to go on, and this had to do with my Christian upbringing. I grew up an Episcopalian, and I hired on in good faith at Ouachita as an Orthodox Christian. And I still think of myself as a Christian, but I really have to classify myself as unorthodox now, because I have become, I'm not proud of it, I'm not bragging, I'm not complaining, but I have become a biscuit. One of the ways I'm gonna start my grammar class, I inherited a grammar class from Susan called Traditional and Transformational Grammar, and I decided to start it actually on a sort of a physical, metaphysical note. The first sentence I'm going to write on the board in August when I start teaching this class is just a 2-word sentence. Everything happens, which of course is a strange sentence because it's, okay, everything happens, that's self-evident. If there's a thing, it's obviously happening. I mean, here's some Russian conversation cards. That's a thing. I guess it's happening. It's sitting here occupying a space. But then, of course, we don't say that. I'm going to then say, boy, think of the power of a prepositional phrase to modify a verb. It's going to be a lecture on how prepositional phrases can act like adverbs. Everything happens soon, everything happens late.
Would you call that a tautology?
Hmm?
Would you call that a tautology?
I'm sorry.
Tautology, tautological? Is that tautological? Like it is what it is? It's like
yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's just self-evident, everything happens. But like I say, we don't run around saying that, but there is a sentence where you add a prepositional phrase, and lots of people say this, and it's a fascination to me and my mystic and biscuit friends. The thing that we do say, and that y'all would probably agree with, or maybe you wouldn't, I don't want to put words or thoughts in your mouths or minds, is everything happens for a reason. And you hear that all the time. I mean, somebody comes on TV and there's just been a tornado, and the tornado's wiped out this street, but not this street. And next thing you know, somebody's likely to be saying everything happens for a reason. And I would say that, for a biscuit, it would be more everything happens. And we don't modify Now, but I don't know, would you all feel, I mean, if you were asked to do a test on the assertion everything happens for a reason, would you be saying that you would say yes to that or no to that? Where would y'all come down on that?
That sort of fits what we were saying before, right, RJ? But when Johnny was sitting back, what's the cause of everything, right?
I mean, well, if you want me to do a quick Schopenhauer on that,
Sure.
he has something called the principle of sufficient reason,
Mm-hmm.
and that is like he classifies the world as will and as representation, but they're not two different things.
And will, you can say, is God or consciousness,
Yes.
right? Just to make it that everyone can understand what that means.
Let me ask, Richard, would you look at the last page of that book in Schopenhauer?
Yeah, and just to finish the point,
I'm just wanting to see if that might be the same last page that I'm
thinking this book ends with him talking about the Milky Ways, the whole world, all the galaxies and everything are nothing.
Yeah, if I could just finish that point, though, he would say the principle of sufficient reason is for the representation, and what he calls representation is what we would call the physical, what a biscuit would call the physical world.
right.
But the physical world exists only in the mind of an individual observer.
Right.
Schopenhauer. So all there is will, and
or consciousness.
Yeah, that's all there is, and everything else is everything else is how the will presents itself to our observation.
Right.
A representation.
I'm gonna have one more look. I really want to see if I can see that Schopenhauer book over here.
Yeah. So that principle of sufficient reason of Schopenhauer is giving us. This actually comes from Kant, but it's actually giving science some objective knowledge, some objectivity that we can all agree on how things appear, how the representations are to every individual human observer. So in that way, Kant, and Schopenhauer got that from Kant, gave objectivity back. And what was his question?
Yeah, I couldn't.
Does it happen for a reason?
Yeah. So I'm just asking y'all, does everything happen for a reason?
I would say the same as what I said before, that there's only this unbounded love, but not romantic, not human, it's just an imagination or a conscious, it's like consciousness. It's not a thing. It's closer to spirit, but it's ephemeral. It's you can't grab it. It's formless and timeless, and that dreams up, whether it's an accident or not an accident. It dreams up just like we do. As a hint, every single night we go to sleep, the Johnny Wink goes to bed and opens up a Broadway opens up, and there's this whole drama goes on of time and space and things, and it's a dream, and you're there, but you're everything. You're the trees in the dream. You're the reason the sun comes up. You're the reason it rains. You're the reason you're scared. Because you believe in it. And then if you lucidly can awaken in a dream and realize that it's all you, it's all made of dream stuff, which is consciousness, which is all there is, then you won't be scared anymore. There won't be fear, and that's love, because you realize everything is you, the true you, not the me, but the true you. And then it's a happy dream, and it's a nightmare otherwise. And the nightmare squeezes you to awaken, and you wake up and say, it was just a dream. And from this reality, when you wake up, there's another awakening that can happen where you awaken to ultimate reality and see that even this grand, what would Shakespeare call this, this amazing world and everything in it was all made of not a solid thing, but consciousness. Everything's consciousness.
Right. So that's
the reason.
There's a reason for everything. Wait, everything happens for a reason?
For a reason, yeah.
Yeah, would strictly and solely be only in regard to the representation that we have in our minds. That there's no objective world that happens. Everything happens for a reason.
So this cause and effect, you're saying in the world of physical.
My friend Eli Craner and I, and Eli's leaning toward being a mystic, but we have a little joke with everything happens for a reason. When we're around each other, I'll go like this: everything happens for a reason, and the reason that just happened is something called the law of gravity. So, but I know that's not what people are talking about when they're being interviewed about the tornado. There's there. I think the idea is that somehow one of the words that people in my neck of the woods here, Orthodox Christians, are very, very fond of associating God with. And in some ways, this seems to me stranger and stranger the further I try to think about it. The four-letter word that God is so often associated with is the word plan. If you see the word plan and the word God in the same sentence, it's going to go something like God has a plan. And I sometimes find myself thinking, maybe kind of playing the devil's advocate and thinking, why does God need a plan? I mean, the God that these people are talking about is a God who is omniscient and so already knows everything, and omnipotent, so can put anything into being. And I would think that plans would go more with people who don't qualify as omniscient and omnipotent. Just the notion of God, but that is indeed, I know it got into one of Jack Butler's novels in a funny way. There was a year when football went on strike. There was no pro football, and the channels, this is years and years ago, they were desperate, to get football in front of people's eyes, on TV, but there was no NFL football. So they started showing minor league football teams. And one of the teams they showed was a team in my region, a team down in Shreveport, Louisiana, called the Shreveport Steamer. The Shreveport Steamer. And they were so zealous of, just televising any football they could, that we even went into the locker room of the Shreveport Steamer after they lost the championship game. And one of the players led the other players in prayer. And what he said was, among other things, God, we know you have a plan for the steamer. We know you have a plan for the steamer. Well, next year, that league folded. And the steamer was no more. And Jack and I got to joking about that the idea of God's got a plan for the steamer. And that became a motif in one of Jack's novels. And at the end of the novel, there's a question and answer session. And one of the questions is, does God have a plan for the steamer? So what do you think, guys? Does God have a plan for the Shreveport Steamer or not?
Well, I'm on record saying definitely no plan.
Okay. I wanted to ask you another thing. Would y'all then, if that darn page from Schopenhauer that I can't find right now,
The last page in volume 1.
it's at the end of this little book I have, and
Oh, not the last page of this book, right?
I don't think.
No, I think it's
how does the last paragraph start?
The last paragraph is a whole page long.
Yeah,
what
it's
is it?
about the Milky Way galaxy being nothing. Everything is nothing.
That's not the same.
That's not the one. No. Yeah, this.
Johnny, so
Don't get me reading this. I'll just start reading it. I got to put this away. It's too good.
beyond reason, everything happening for beyond all that, what a mystic, every mystic says, every single mystic, every sage, is that all is well. That's the message that comes back. All is well. No matter. Remember, Jim Phelan had and Doug Hofstadter had a problem with that in my book. That all is well. Everything's great. Everything's going to be fine. You know.
But from the point of view of eternity.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
not when you're in a cage.
Eternity, right. Yeah.
Right. Not from this perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Not from a cage.
Human brain perspective.
Well, one thing then, a question for the two of y'all is, would you part company with Schopenhauer on that page I'm talking about where he says it would, I'm sure you would, if he meant it when he said it would have been better had life not been, y'all would certainly say a hearty no to that, wouldn't you?
No,
I would. I don't know about RJ.
No, I get what he means. Like
Yeah.
I read the Jainist approach to, ending the suffering by not procreating. I totally get that. I totally understand. There will be absolutely 100% unequivocally, there will be suffering if you're born. No question about it.
That's the first noble truth, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's the truth of suffering. But then it takes a certain individual. Not everyone does it. Everyone can do it, but not everyone does do it. Is to after a while figure out that what is causing the suffering is in you. And what is it? It's your desire. You're overly desiring. And see, that's why it's Schopenhauer again. Like if the essential nature of ultimate reality is desire,
right,
and it's trying to feel its way and creating the universe with instinct and intuition,
right,
then it would make sense that we have desire and we have intuition and we're trying to feel our way around and understand what's going on. But that what makes sense though is that the desire is out of control from the ultimate reality because it's trying to figure it out. So we have to, with the same micro desire as the macro desire, it's our job to. That's why what evolved over millions of years is that self-reflection, because the self-reflection is what makes us be able to stand outside ourselves and look at ourselves and see our faults and our desires and now we can overcome our desire by standing back and introspection.
Right.
So that ability.
I'm going to go get another glass, a cup of water, and when I come back, I'm going to tell you how it just at the personal and the existential level, how profoundly I agree with what Shah has just said and how I've been trying to preach this gospel to myself. And I'll explain this. I'll be right back.
Okay. Take your time.
Some more fruit water here.
I love that he loves to want to know where we're coming from. He's great.
Yeah, he is. Wait, what did you just say? I had something, but then the last line you just said. The desire. So that's where you turn the will. Schopenhauer would say within, right? Turn away from the will, turn within,
right?
Which is what every religion has, that path of the prodigal son, turn within. Schopenhauer, Plato's cave, turn within, or turn around, which is turn within. So you have to turn from the will and deny the will
and it makes sense if ultimate reality is if the nature of ultimate reality is desire and urge and will,
right?
That would mean that okay, what we are is an activity of that, and we definitely have desire, and and Schopenhauer would say if the universe is not volitional, if it's not volitional, then the universe wouldn't be doing anything.
Right.
The universe is always doing something. It's never static. It's always planets are flying around, people are doing things. Like everything is in motion all the time. So similarly, if we didn't have desire and fear, we would be static. But we're not. We're always doing things. We're always active. So it just fits perfectly. Desire, will. We have a will. There's the will, and then once you control it, then life becomes tolerable. Like that's the difference between being that. Remember that positivity you were talking about before, Johnny? The empty positivity.
Mhm.
See, Schopenhauer wouldn't be down with that. He would say, no. And he's a Buddhist, because the Buddhist would say you want to go from suffering to equilibrium, the middle path, the golden, the middle way. You know, not too crazy, not too happy, not too. You want to get there, and that's when life is good.
And he'd say he's one with Meister Eckhart too. By turning in, you realize the Godhead, which is not roving at all. It's total quiet, total stillness. No, it's rest.
Again, our podcast is good because you will give the point of view of eternity, and
I'm also giving it's Schopenhauer.
No, you do
right
both.
Right next to Buddha. He says, "I'm with the Buddha,
and
I'm with Meister Eckhart." He says, "I'm with the Christian mystics."
And Johnny, by the way, Johnny, Schopenhauer read the Upanishads every night.
I know about that. Yeah, I knew
one question for you, Johnny. One question for you, and then I know you have questions first. When you said everything happens for a reason, and you went like that, and the reason was gravity.
Yeah.
Could the reason be your free will to want to drop it?
That's good. You're right. You're right.
Okay.
What Shaw said that so spoke to me though was some part of my struggle with grief. After Susan died, I think I got it in my head, and this has complicated my life. I was thinking, I believe that something, I just wanted to have gone with Susan that day. I mean, she was on a breathing machine, and they took her off the machine and gave her some morphine, and she slipped away, and a large part of me was thinking, I wish they'd have given me some too. And I could have just slipped away and joined her in oblivion, or wherever. But then I did live, and I didn't go jump in the river. I went on living. Here I am, still living, But I think I had it in my mind that something was going to save me. I remember I used to look into a corner of the room when I was just at home by myself, and I'd say, Susan, why don't you come get me? As if I don't really talk to Susan, but I knew that was just fanciful, imagining her there, but that could be one way, why can't the goddess of Oblivio come and take me in her arms and it can all be over? But then, since it wasn't over and I'm still going on, then I think I thought foolishly, well, someone will save me. And I think then that I put too much on my friend Beth Polo. And one of the things about Beth that is the case, she and I really, even though we just live 60 miles from each other, we don't see each other that often. She's very busy. She makes jewelry for a living and is a dietitian. So she's got a lot of work to do, and we're lucky if we see each other once a month. We have phone dates and I write her a lot, and but I think that somehow I thought, well, Beth's going to be my salvation, and it wasn't going to be because she was going to marry me. That didn't seem like a good idea to either of us. The idea of marrying at this stage of our lives, but that caused some friction too, because I think I depended on her too much, and I noticed that whenever we were together, we just had a great time, whether going to a picnic or going to eat dinner in Little Rock or whatever we would do, we would have a really good time. And one of her other nicknames is Paloma, because she's a very peaceable person, and that's dove in Spanish. And I'm gabbling on. I'm going to try to bring this to a point here. And I would say to Beth, I would say, boy, I'll be glad when Paloma comes in bottles. And it was like the feeling I would get when Beth would come and spend a couple of hours with me and we'd go picnicking. I just was rejuvenated, or when I'd be writing her a letter. So I was only half joking when I said I wish Beth came in bottles, and I could just get a 6-pack, at the store and drink me a bottle of Paloma but then I gradually realized, and this is where what you were saying, Brother Shaw, got to me and was very powerful to me. I thought, man, if there's any such thing as saving yourself, if that means anything, it's got to be inside you, man. I mean, it's not going to be Beth Polo or that poem you read over there, or this friend or that friend or the other friend, as important as they are in your lives. James Plath isn't going to save you. You're going to save yourself if anybody does. And that's what I've been trying to work my way, to is I know Richard Wilbur's got a great line in one of his poems. He says, it's all about a very ceremonious painting and how a painting can be so ceremonious. But then he says, but ceremony never did conceal how much we are the woods we wander in. And that's it. I'm the woods I wander in, and the brambles, that's me. And it's up to me, to, with whatever help I can get, but don't go locating your salvation, in Beth Polo or James Plath or anybody who isn't you, So that's been a part of my, my ongoing struggle.
I would say a lot of people, I would say most people, well, I don't know, a lot of people go to their graves never knowing that true happiness can only come from themselves and not other people or other things.
Yeah, there's so many other things you can put your and want to, and so it was like I would just Beth would come over and we'd have a good time, but I wasn't saved, and because I'd like that time, but then I'd miss her, and then I'd get it in my mind that somehow she ought to be the answer to my problems, and I finally awoke from that, at least I've made that much progress to have awakened from that.
What you're saying, Johnny, reminds me of Douglas Hofstadter when he was going through Carol's death, his wife. I wrote him after reading a Carson McCullers novel, and she talked about the grief that you and Doug both know about when a lover or a wife or a husband passes away, and now you're left, and Carson McCullers says, why doesn't that person just follow, like you said, give me the morphine, or let me go, follow her right away. I'm sure Doug had the same thoughts, like why doesn't that the one who's left behind follow the other into the what does Shakespeare call that, the country that no one returns from, or something?
The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns.
So why not? And then McCullers goes on and says, is it to make the funeral arrangements? Is it to carry on their work? Is it to, and she lists a bunch of things. And at the very end, she said something that struck me and it fit Douglas Hofstadter, that no, the reason that you don't go join that the lost lover is because you have to stay and allow for the resurrection of that lover within you. And that's Doug's theory of soul shards, where you have a copy of that person running, like Carol or Susan. Susan is very much alive, Doug would say, in your brain. And
he's really beautiful on that idea. He, as you and I know, James, he expresses it a lot, and he expresses it very, very beautifully. And one of the many things I love about Doug Hofstadter is what a wonderful resurrector he is of a lot of his friends. I mean, those who have gone on, he writes these books, these chapbooks, and they're just such wonderful memorials, and he's got just the most generous heart, for wanting to.
So
And
just
it's
to,
like James, it was like when he got us all together,
yeah,
I mean, he wants, and I understand that, I'm sort of known around Ouachita and among my friends as the pimp, because I'm always, I mean, look at me. And one time there were these two women that were 10 years apart in their age. And I got this crazy feeling one Sunday afternoon that they had to know each other. So I stopped what I was doing and wrote a long letter introducing Sarah to Hannah. And then it was almost like lust. I mean, this had to happen, I'm banging away, writing this letter. And then Sarah writes me and says, well, I wrote your friend Hannah as per your request, but I didn't hear back from her. By then the lust had passed away from it. Okay, that was just silly. But then Hannah did write Sarah. And the next thing I knew, they're best of friends, and they are to this day. So, and so I get what Doug does. And what he did with us that was so wonderful is he gets us all together at his wedding. He invites all these people. He puts them up at the Scholars Inn, those that he could get in there. And look at us, we've gone on, we become the November Magic Gang. And that's all because of this desire he has. And it's like, I'm that way. Like I say, I want you and Brother Sean now to get to know Joe Graves and do this podcast with Joe sometimes and do it with Beth, sometime.
yeah.
And I really, really hope that'll happen.
But just to polish off that point, sorry, Doug would say now to merge, like Susan or Carol are dancing in the sparks of your neurons in your brain, and there's a copy of them, and you can see a sunset, or you can see the beach, or different things will trigger, and you can see it through Susan's eyes. It's like seeing through, and that's the closest that a biscuit materialist can come to this. And all RJ and I are saying in Schopenhauer is forget the brain part. It's that you and Susan are one, and everything is one. So you merge with Susan, and that's what Joe was saying in the restaurant.
That's what Joe was saying at the restaurant.
She's right here, right now. Everything is right here, because there's only this, and it's like a frequency on a radio that you can dial to, and our minds are so noisy you can't get to that frequency, and so you hear about it. It's the mystic frequency instead of the biscuit radio.
Exactly.
It's it's mystic.
One of Beth Polo's mystic chants. She'll very often, I might not hear from her for several days, and she'll write just a little note on email, and she'll say, "I am loving you. Do you feel me?"
Yeah.
And sometimes she'll go even stronger. She says, "I am loving you. Surely you must feel me,"
Right.
And so she's, I'm not a biscuit who wants to, I was a mystic, I'm a biscuit, and I would love, what you guys have, and we'll strive to have it, I'm not a smug biscuit is what I'm saying, I'm not saying, oh yeah, I'm the one that knows the truth about all of this,
Right.
Johnny, have you probably heard of this man, Sadhguru?
Say his name again.
Sadhguru?
I don't know. How do you spell it?
Sadhguru. Anyway, he's very popular, but he said this one thing about people who wanted to kill themselves or join their loved one passed away, and they want to go into the abyss with them. And he just said something like, the person who wants to die, he says to them, okay, hold your breath right now. Hold your breath. And then right before you take a breath, hold it as long as you can. Don't breathe. Right now, kill yourself. Do it. Right before you breathe, you figure out why you're going to take that breath.
That's very good. I like that.
And the reason why I like that is because Schopenhauer says the strongest thing we have is our will to live. That's the strongest emotion that we have, and we don't know why we want to live.
Right, right.
We don't know.
You've just
But you
reminded me
want
of
to.
something.
But somehow there's a reason we want to. And you know what? If you don't know the reason, hold your breath.
Yeah.
That's good. You've just reminded me of something wonderful that a friend of mine named Johnny Johnson told me. Johnny is the son of a Baptist preacher. Johnny was my student in the 70s, about the same time Joe Graves was. And Johnny and I have stayed good friends all through these years. He's made his career and is now retired as he was an emergency room nurse. Well, his father, who is a Baptist minister, and is not in very good health. And he's always bitching, said Johnny, about, why doesn't God come and take me? And I just wish the Lord would take me. I don't know why the Lord is allowing me to stay here. And Johnny will sometimes get in his dad's face. His mom and dad are still alive, and he'll kind of read his dad the riot act and certain. And what Shaw said that reminded me of is about the taking the breath. Johnny says, "Dad, remember that night when you started having bad chest pains? Remember what you wanted to do? You wanted us to rush you to the hospital right then, Dad." And he said, the Lord was trying to do what you've been asking the Lord to do. The Lord just can't come down and lift you up, by the scruff of your neck and fly off with you. If the Lord's going to take you, it's going to have to be through the agency of something like heart attack, So Johnny says, so Dad, maybe you keep griping about the Lord's not taking you, but the minute he tried to the other night, you were take me to the hospital. So he gives his old daddy a kind of a hard time sometimes with that. And that's what the thing about hold your breath. Put me in mind of that.
Yeah.
Paul Harris and I sometimes talk about it's a nice experiment I'm trying to write up for a book. If you had a button in front of you, you could draw a little button on the table right there, draw a little circle, and you could hit that button. And maybe next to the button, you could put 3 lines, right? 3 little lines, 1, 2, 3. And that button, when you hit it, man, oh man, you are gone into infinite loving consciousness forever. It's so beautiful. It's blissful. It's Susan. It's everything. It's Shakespeare. It's Einstein. It's everyone that's ever. It's the love of everything, and it's right there. All you have to do is hit that button. No more body, no more pain, no more suffering. And then on those 3 little lines, or you might have to extend it to a big list, you write the reasons why you will not hit that button right now.
That's great, yeah.
And when you see those, let's say 3 big reasons, like, like for you, maybe Eugene, your child, whatever your reason, you write it down, and then you see that you can work on those attachments because there's a little attachment there.
That's great.
That's very
really
good.
Yeah.
Very good.
And then you take some astonishment medicine, LSD or mushrooms or MDMA and silent darkness, and then the button is hit. And you can experience it, and you'll be back and you could have breakfast.
That's great.
But you'll get to the top of Everest and see what it's like, and you'll know the map.
Right. Well, listen, I've got to be somewhere at 1:30. So, and I just noticed the time.
This is perfect.
It seems to have flown. we must have been having fun.
This was so enjoyable for me. This was amazing for me. Thank you so much for your time.
So good to get to know and to add you to my trinity and make it a quaternity of favorite mystics. So good to see you, friend. And
let's definitely do it again. We'll do it again with Joe and Beth.
I hope so. I hope it comes to pass. Okay. Love you guys.
Thank you, Johnny.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You there, Johnny? Oh, he's gone.
Did you stop recording?
Oh, I didn't stop recording.